and good morning. And again, I say good morning and welcome everyone to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. I am delighted to be your host today, Michael Kernodle. And guess what? We have a special treat. And I know you like treats because that's why you come here. And today's treat, we have the honor of having the Professor Brandon Robertson. And his topic today is what and I say that again, every bass player should know. So buckle your seatbelts. I know you're excited, whether you're a bass player, trumpet player, you play the spoons. It doesn't matter. I know you're excited because you're going to get some great information from the professor today. But before we start, I just want to remind you, if you're joining us live, there's a little feature there. It's called chat. If you have any questions or you just want to chime in and say, hey, that was an awesome point. We love interaction and questions. So go in there, type it out. We're going to leave some time near the end to answer any of those questions or comments. So this would not be possible, Professor, if we didn't have awesome sponsors. So I want to remind everybody, please be sure to check out the studio archives of past video sessions at clearwaterjazz.com's education outreach section. And that's brought to you by Blue Water Wealth Management at Stewart Partners and Duke Energy, as well as the Young Lions podcast available wherever you stream. And that's brought to our friends at Marine Max Clearwater. And you could just search Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions wherever you stream. I mean, where do I start here? I mean, the professor, he is a regular here. He's given us so many awesome sessions. I mean, I have some favorites, but just to name a few, here's some. Know Your Worth, Negotiating the Gig. That's right. We talk about the business other than just playing the instruments. He's also brought us how to develop melodic bass lines, playing duo performances, creating new music composition and charts. I mean, this man is amazing. He has so much knowledge, and he's always willing to share it with us. And if you don't know him, Brandon Robertson is an Emmy-nominated music director, professional upright electric bassist, composer, and music educator, originally from none other than Tampa. Some people call it Tampa, Florida. That's right, a place where all champions dwell. But he completed his Bachelor's of Arts in Music from Florida State University in 2009 and a Master's of Music and Jazz Studies in the spring of 2016. What an awesome accomplishment. And currently, if you don't know, he is the director of jazz studies and the director of the FGCU basketball band at Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers. He is doing this thing. And you know what? He has some music. If you haven't heard his music, he released an album called Based on a True Story. Went all the way to number 16 on the iTunes Top 200 list. You should check that out if you want to hear what this awesome educator has done. And he's played on stages all over the country, all over the world, from some of the greatest names from Carmen Bradford, Jason Marsalis, Marcus Robertson, Marty Burrell, Wyclef Gordon. I could go on and on, but I won't, because you're here to hear about what every bass player should know. So, Professor, the stage is all yours.
I don't even know where to start. That's why I took so long to answer, because I was just soaking in and basking in all the wonderful intro that Mr. Kernodle did, man. Appreciate you, man, as always, man. Thank you. And thank you to the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation for always having me on these sessions. They're wonderful, happy to do them, excited to do them. And let's continue on our partnership. Love it very, very much. All right, so for today's topic, we got to get right into it, right? Because don't want to waste no time here. What should every bass player know? Well, first and foremost, there are certain, what I like to call standard literature or repertoire or books that are a necessity per se. Like you need to know what these are, okay, if you're a bass player. And if you're a young bass player, let's say if you're watching this and you're starting out at the middle school level, you're a young middle school kid that's in band, and your teacher just so happens that your band just so happens to have a jazz band, and your teacher's telling you about these wonderful musicians and jazz bands and different band leaders such as, like Duke Ellington and Count Basie. You're talking about all of these great, wonderful guys, but then like you're getting curious and you don't know where to start. And you're a young bass player, you're a rhythm section player, so it's like he's talking about, your band director. They're talking about, folks who are primarily horn players. Seldom, there's a few, Cab and Billy Eckstein and Duke, these guys, Count Basie, they play piano, so that would be considered a rhythm section instrument. But for the most part, a lot of these guys were horn players. So where do we start? And so for me, I always like to say you need to know the history. Okay, so there is a few things that you can do. There's this wonderful book that I talked about. Sorry about that. There's this book that I talked about before, and I've mentioned this in the previous session, the Jazz Standard. Now, every bass player should have this book. I'm going to tell you why y'all should have this book, bass players. Because it lists, if I open up the page here, and I go right here to the very beginning, or I should go to the second page here, you'll see a whole collection of standards. This is pretty much all the standards that every bass player should know. I mean, there's more. But this particular book here, this one specifically, every bass player should have that book, because it not only will help you. Sorry about that, guys. It will not only put you ahead of the game. It'll give in terms of the historical content of the standards, but then it'll also tell you the players. It'll mention to you who's on those recordings. And so now what you should start doing is building you a repertoire list of bass players that are featured during these eras. So whenever you're talking about different players through different decades of jazz, you know which bass players that were the most prominent during this time period. And so in this case, the first thing is, you want to get books. So I would recommend the book, The Jazz Standard. I'd also would recommend the Jazz Bass book, which also here, which is this book right here, the Jazz Bass book. Every bass player, young bass player, should get this book by John Goldsmith. This is an awesome book. We call this like the Jazz Bass Bible. This is the one that will not only get you started, but it has so much prominent information. And here's the cool thing about it. It has a list of all the bass players from every different era of jazz. And it also gives you the history of those bass players. It tells you specifically who these bass players performed with to the T. And then it gives you suggested recordings or some of the famous highlighted recordings that these bass players were featured on. So that's another great book that I would suggest that you should get. The other book is the Jazz Bassline by Michael Downes. And this book particularly, every bass player should have this because it breaks down the infrastructure of bass lines. So you ever wonder how like people can make bass lines that sound so melodic and they connect so well that you're just like, wow, like they spend hours and hours sitting down piecing this together, and they go meticulously through each note and this and that. Not necessarily, because there is a method and there are theories of ways of how to approach bass lines. And this book this book is a fantastic book, the Jazz Bassline book, which I believe, if you give me a second here, oh yep, I have it right here. Every bass player should have this book. This is a great book. I use this book a lot. It literally breaks down all of the different structures. So like this particular here page here, I open up and it talks about some of the famous bass players throughout history and how they approach rhythm changes. So they take a simple rhythm changes chord progression, and then they have like Paul Chambers, they have Israel Crosby, they have Ray Brown, they have Sam Jones, they have Ron Carter, George DeVere. They have a few different bass players in the bass lines. And so it breaks down for those who are trying to learn how to play bass lines. That's a great book that every bass player should have. The Ray Brown bass method book, super killing. That particular book, I would highly recommend that all bass players get that one, because he shows you his methods of how he approached the bass, the way he practiced, some of the things that helped build his technique. He shows you how to play tenths, shows you how to play different double stops. He goes through different sequences of triplets. So it's a wonderful book for bass players who are looking to kind of get more advanced playing down within their technique. And I would recommend that book for more players that are kind of graduating out of high school, entering college. Okay. And then The Evolving Bass is by Rufus Reed. This is the one that I think all bass players around the country have studied out of. This book came out, I believe, in the late 70s. So, I mean, this book has been around for some time now. And I'm pretty sure, if not a lot of bass players have worked through this book, and it's been very useful. Rufus Reed does a great job breaking down just his approaches of teaching the upright bass on jazz, and he has a whole section of every chord scale that goes with different chords between Dorian, from half diminished to full diminished to dominant to augmented. He goes through different standards where he shows you how to approach these tunes with different bass lines that he comes up with, in different ways of how to show you how to break those down. So that's another wonderful book that I would highly recommend that you check out. So that's just for the books. That's strictly just for books. Okay, the Jazz Bass book by John Goldsby, the Jazz Bassline book by Mike Downs, the Jazz Standard by Ted Gior, and also The Evolving Basses by Rufus Reed. Pick those up. Must have. If you're a young bass player, have that in your bass library. Now, here's some recordings. I had to write these down because there were a few. Now, these were recordings that I either stumbled across myself and I just remember to write them down and I've kept them, or these were recordings that were suggested to me over time. But there's quite a few, and I wanted to suggest like what recordings that bass players should have specifically to check out these specific bass players on these records. The first one is the Stratford Shakespearean Festival that happens in Ontario, Canada. This is with the Oscar Peterson Trio, and this feature Herb Ellis and on guitar, and I believe Ray Brown was on this record, Ed Thigpen on drums. And this particular record, it's a great feature of Ray Brown, like at his prime. I mean, this was when he was at the height of his career with the OPT, and I mean, these guys had played everywhere around the world at this point, and Ray Brown was really refining and redefining the style of jazz bass. Just the melodic sense, the harmonic presence, the rhythmic presence, everything. The second record, so that's one record I recommend that every bass player should know and want to get. The Stratford Shakespearean Festival by the Oscar Peterson Trio. All right, and I believe that was like somewhere around like the mid 50s. So it had to be like 56, maybe 57, somewhere around there. Everybody digs Bill Evans. Now, this one right here is, bruh, yeah. Sam Jones, like, it was one of my favorite bass players anyways. And outside of that parameter, you know, you had Scott LaFaro and Eddie Gomez, and you know, these guys had very specific ways of how they approached the double bass. And Sam Jones was like the complete opposite. He wasn't near like, and actually Paul Chambers too, who also recorded with Bill Evans. Like the two of them played completely opposite of what, you know, Eddie Gomez and Scott LaFaro did. And so this is one of Bill Evans' like most prominent and famous recordings. And, you know, Sam Jones is a bass player that every bass player should know. Every bass player should know. And he's also a local legend. I know that he spent some time down in the St. Pete area as well. So everybody should check that out. Bass players, young bass players, look for recordings. Everybody digs Bill Evans by the Bill Evans Trio, and that's Sam Jones on bass. The next one is the Bud Powell Trio, and this is kind of like I wouldn't say a two-disc, but a two-sided record. It features Curly Russell, who played with Charlie Parker prominently throughout the 40s and 50s, and then George DeRiviere, who actually started touring with Errol Garner and also Bud Powell during this time in the 50s and 60s as well. He's probably one of my favorite melodic bass players too. He just has a very unique, different way of how he approaches the bass. But I would recommend that record as well. That's the Bud Powell Trio plays, and that's Curly Russell on bass and also George DeRiviere on bass as well. So then you have the Concert by the Sea by Errol Gardner, and this is Eddie Calhoun. Eddie Calhoun was a big band bassist from the 40s. He also too had performed with Miles Davis. He's also early Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Bud Powell, and this was a good. Errol Garner obviously was probably one of the most prolific pianists of the 40s and 50s, and into the 60s too. But the 40s and 50s were his huge peak of his career. So that's another record that I would recommend. Great bass playing on that one. Things Are Getting Better by my man Cannonball Adderley and Milt Jackson vibraphonist. And of course, this was a bass player who played with Cannonball quite frequently in the earlier career, aside from Sam Jones, and that's Percy Heath. Percy Heath, who was the bass player for the Modern Jazz Quartet that featured Milt Jackson and also John Lewis and Connie Kay and Kenny Clark in the earlier period. So I just did a recent series, What I Love About series on Percy Heath, and talked immensely and very in depth about that particular group. But Percy Heath sounds killing on this record. Killing. So things are getting better because you know, we're slowly getting out of this pandemic. But you know, I got high hopes because we like music. So if you like this record and you believe that things are getting better, go check out this record by Cannonball, Percy Heath on bass. Okay, so next one. Another one, classic. I got hip to this when I got to college, and it changed my life forever. Aside from Black Codes also changed my life, and I'm talking about the record that was by none other than Wynton Marsalis. But this series of records that he did afterwards, Standard Times Volume 1 with Bob Hurst. Bob Hurst, to me, is the GOAT of our generation, like the GOAT. And I hope that anybody that's watching this video, that you can somehow tell him to come and watch this series so he can hear me tell him to start giving his flowers. He is the GOAT. Always been my favorite bass player. Bob Hurst is no stranger to the Marsalis family. He's worked immensely with Wynton Marsalis and Branford. Listen, the trio record that he got with Branford And just go listen to Branford's record, the trio record that he got with Bob Hurst. Oh man, I forget who's. I am going blank right now. Who's on drums? But man, go listen to the Monks song Friday the 13th and listen to them. Man, they just snap. But anyways, I'm going on a tangent there. I'm sorry, but Bob Hurst is probably one of my favorite bass players, aside from Christian McBride. I mean, I'm talking about of our generation. Like he's up there. He's always been up there. Okay, Naturally. This is a record by a trumpeter and the brother of Cannonball Adderley, Nat Adderley, and this also has a double joint two-side that features two different basses. Sam Jones, who was a regular of Nat Adderley, and then of course my man PC. Everybody know who PC. You call him PC when you know who he is, and I ain't know him personally, but you know I felt like I knew him personally because of much I studied about him. But we talking about Paul Chambers from the D. From Detroit, you know what I'm saying? So you know who PC is, you know he gets busy. He gets busy with them notes. So it's cool. So PC and Sam Jones are both featured on this record. This is a great record. I got hip to this record also when I got to college. And that Adderley got slept on a lot, man. He was a very funky, you know, I always put him like, it's like him, Lee Morgan, Freddie Hubbard, Booker Little, like these guys were like, they just had a Blue Mitchell, they just had a different sound in the 60s. Like different trumpet sound that was happening like prior to the 50s and 40s. Like it just was funkier, it just was more greasier, it just was like very brash, just really in your face, you know. And I just appreciate that about Nat Adderley. When you heard him cook, you know, when he got busy, you know, he let you know, like, I'm in it, I'm real, okay? And then keep going. Live at the Cafe Bohemia, you know, but the Jazz Messengers, of course, this is earlier Jazz Messengers. This is like we're talking like 54 to like 55, 56, you know, early Jazz Messengers. And this features another Detroit bassist who is also cousins of Paul Chambers, and this is Doug Watkins on bass. So for those of you who are Art Blakey fans, make sure you check out Live at Cafe Bohemia Volume 1. There's 2 volumes, but Volume 1 gets down. You know, that features my man Doug Watkins. Now, going back to Cannonball, the Cannonball Nancy Wilson record. I don't want to hear nobody's mouth on that one. Because that one right there, you can play that whole record right now and it'll still hit in 2022. And this record was made in, I think, in 61. Fire. Features one of my favorite all-time versions of Frank Loessler's from the Green Willow musical, from the musical Green Willow, and there's a song by Frank Loessler, Never Will I Marry. Bruh, Nancy snapped, or the kids call it now, she slapped on that one, for real. So yeah, totally gotta check that one out. Sam Jones, of course, SJ on bass, he holding it down, you know, holding the low end. This one is the most iconic and prolific record that you can ever. Every bass player, matter of fact, this is how bad this how killing it is, right? Let me hold on, y'all, hold on. Give me a second. This is all in the moment. You get this all in the moment. This is all in the moment. This is how iconic this next bass player is. But man, okay, sorry, I had to play a little bit of that for you. You had to get a little bit of that. And what I'm talking about, everybody, That was all in the spare of the moment, everybody, by the way. And what I'm referring to Israel Crosby off from the Ahmad Jamal Trio cross country tour or live at the Persian. Listen, every bass player need to check that record out. If you a young up and coming bassist and you want to learn how to play some bass, you want to learn how to play some killing bass lines, check out Israel Crosby. Now, Israel Crosby started out with Teddy Wilson from back in the day. Teddy Wilson was a pianist, and he started with him back in the 30s and the 40s. But then he transitioned, and when he got with Ahmad, that was like putting peanut butter with jelly, sugar with Kool-Aid, ham and cheese. You know what I'm saying? Like, they go together. Yeah. Israel Crosby. He had to turn the camera. Okay, and then lastly, I gotta end you on this good note. One of the most killing Monk records. There's two. It's Monk Time, which features Butch Warren on bass. And that's a killing record. But this one here, live at the IT Club, came out, and it was recorded earlier, but it was released in '82. This record with Larry Gales, boy, Monk playing all kind of stuff. Charlie Rouse on alto playing all kind of stuff. Ben Riley on drum playing all kind of stuff. But Larry, I said, playing all kind of stuff. And that recording, every bass player should have that one. I've transcribed that record so many times it ain't even funny. So I'm gonna go through these records again. You need the Stanford Shakespearean Festival by the Oscar Peterson Trio. That featured Ray Brown. Everybody Digs Bill Evans by the Bill Evans Trio. That features Sam Jones. The Bud Powell Trio plays, which features Curly Russell and George DeRiviere. Then you have Concert by the Sea by Errol Gardner. That features Eddie Calhoun. Then you have Things Are Coming Better by the Cannonball Adderley with Milt Jackson, Percy Heath on bass. Then you have Marsalis Standard Time Volume 1. That's my man, Bob Hurst. Naturally by Nat Adderley Quartets, and that's Sam Jones and my man PC, aka Paul Chambers. Live at the Cafe Bohemia Volume 1, the Jazz Messengers, earlier Jazz Messengers. That's Doug Watkins on bass. The duo collab record with Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley, that features Sam Jones. The Cross Country Tour, Ahmad Jamal Trio, which is the famous iconic bass line that comes right off that record, off the Gershwin tune, But Not For Me. And that's my man Israel Crosby playing bass. And then Live at the IT Club by Thelonious Monk and Larry Gales on bass. So for today, everybody, that's what everybody bass player needs to know. Every bass player needs to know those records, and every bass player needs to know those books. Appreciate you.
You've heard it live and direct.
Live and direct, man, of course.
The man that should know, would know, could know, and definitely knows.
Facts.
All the things that bass players should know, and we know how important it is for a bass player to be well versed and just solid. That rhythm section in any ensemble is determined upon the one with that bass. He runs the band. We don't like to hear that often, but that bass runs the band. Would you say that's true, Professor?
Man, that's certainly true, man. Don't get it twisted. We are the back. We are your spine. That's why we're upright.
And without a spine,
we not curvy. You know, we are upright. That means we solid. And we are a palm tree. I live in the city of palms, people. We are tight. That bark is tight. We are grounded.
Nobody wants to play with the Jellyfish Band. So we thank you so much, Professor, for giving us
you guys
so many great resources. I mean, I love the books, and the good thing about this, you can always go back and rewind, pause, and write the name of that book down. Check it out at your local library, or go online and buy that book, and maybe you can contact Professor to see, hey, what did you like about this, or what more can you tell about it? But till then, I just really highly, highly recommend that you check out our past archives. And guess what? All of this great information you're receiving right now is free. I can't stress to you, it's free. I mean, there's people that pay hundreds of dollars for good knowledge like this, private lessons and things like that. But this is free. And you can find it at www.clearwaterjazz.com/education. And you know what? If you love what you hear, of course, we want you to share, but we like to get feedback as well. So if you have a future session topic suggestion, or you just want to tell how great you love these sessions with the professor, you can email us at info@clearwaterjazz.com. You know what? I think I am full today from that great meal cooked up by this chef. And I think it's time to go on and maybe wait until the next one.
Yeah, man. I guess you gotta wait and see what happens next time. Come on back at the next session.
And the only way you can do that is just stay connected. And of course, like we always say, keep swinging. I've been your guest host, Michael Canodal. I don't know why I'm saying guest because I'm here all the time, but it's certainly a pleasure. And of course, this has been the Professor Brandon Robertson. We appreciate you for joining us, and keep it swinging.
Keep it swinging. Have a good one, y'all.